then. There you go. All right.
I got white bounce already.
In the morning.
Everybody good? They got this?
One moment. Can I get them? Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Officer Robert Reeves, Public Information Officer for the Irving Police Department. This evening at around 8 p.m., there was a patient here in the emergency room. He was in a patient room. A hospital nurse went to check on that patient. She saw that he had a handgun. That alarmed her. His behavior alarmed her even more. So she contacted Baylor police officer that was on scene, and also an Irving police officer that was on scene on an unrelated incident where he had made a DWI arrest, and he was up here doing the blood draw on that. Those two officers went to that patient's room, the suspect's room. He fired off one gunshot round at that time. Other officers were responding to the hospital as they had already put out over the radio, we had a man with a gun. There was some initial reports that this was an active shooter situation. Those were incorrect. What that was a witness that had called up to our dispatch and said that they heard shots being fired at the hospital, and what that was going to be when the officers returned fire. So when the officers confronted the suspect in the room, he fired another shot at them, at least one. The officers returned fire, and the suspect is deceased. He is a African-American male, 34 years of age. His name is not being released at this time. We can follow up and take care of that tomorrow, just for the initial investigation and follow up with family along those lines. No other persons were injured. The other hospital rooms next to us were occupied, and those officers definitely could not let that suspect exit that ward. Does anybody have, obviously, any questions? I'll take questions now.
So the patient fired at the officers first, is what you're saying?
Correct. The initial investigation right now shows that he did fire one round when the first two officers approached him, and then he fired another round when support officers were arriving on scene.
So basically, they tried to go in and talk to him about why he had a gun. Clearly, he's a patient in the hospital, and then he fired a round at them, and they didn't present a weapon or anything?
Correct. So our officers were obviously armed. The officers that were arriving on scene had their plate carriers as standard practice whenever they're responding to a man with a gun call. They had their plate carriers, and they did deploy their rifles, their patrol rifles, and they were trying to talk to that individual, and then he ended up shooting off at least one round. At this time, it's a crime scene. It's being worked. Our crime scene investigators are in there. Our criminal investigators are in there. Dallas County District Attorney's Office, the shoot squad will be coming over here, which responds to all officer-involved shootings. And so this scene is still being worked. It's still very fresh, and we're still processing it as well. So we're processing to see if there might have been more than two rounds fired by the suspect, but we know at least 2 rounds were fired by him. And we do know that there's 2 officers that were involved in the shooting and shot back.
Was he in a hospital bed when he shot, or was he trying to leave the room, or what were the circumstances?
Those specifics, I don't know at this time. I know that he was in that room and that the officers were confronting and trying to talk to him and trying to get him to put that gun down, and it escalated to him firing off another round, which in turn they felt threatened and fired their guns off at him.
Were either of those officers struck?
No officers were struck, but no other individuals except for the suspect were injured in this incident.
How long was he in
I do not know when he got admitted today, or if he even was admitted. It was an ER room, so that's the first stage. We all know when you come to a hospital, you go to one of those ER rooms before you actually get admitted or handled and discharged. So I don't know when he actually got here today.
So was it a closed off room with a door, or was it just like a kind of an area that had a kind of a drapery around it?
So all of the rooms inside here have kind of like a sliding glass door. So each room does have the drapery. I don't know if the drapery was drawn at that time. That'll be further information.
But he was confined. There wasn't any other patients near him. It sounds like they were in next door.
Correct. They were in adjacent rooms or hallway.
Was he showing the gun, or was he just?
Correct. So they did see the gun. They did hear one gunshot go off. The nurse did see the gun when she went in there to check on the suspect, on the patient. And that's what caused her to alert the police that were here.
And you say he was acting wild while he was.
His behavior when she first contacted him made her feel uncomfortable. And so, and then seeing him with a handgun, that added to that, and that's why she felt that she needed to contact the police right away.
I don't think I had a gun in there. Did he just bring it in when he was admitted, you think?
Correct.
And so they didn't like pat him down or like anything whenever he was like being seen? Or
No, I don't.
just based off his injuries or why he was there?
I don't. His injuries or why he was in the hospital right now. That's not being released. That may be released later, but right now that's kind of a HIPAA issue right there. But he was not patted down. I don't think that's common practice for them to pat people down.
Okay. When he was shot, when his body fell, when he was shot, was he still in that same room?
He was in the same room, yes.
About how long did that take to play out from those first officers to the second one?
So, I mean, it happened. The call was approximately 8 o'clock, and I was already getting called by about 8:15, 8:20. So it was a pretty quick, fluid incident.
Did the suspect fire 2 shots? Is that what you're saying?
The suspect did fire at least 2 shots.
At least 2 shots.
Right. As they process the scene, they'll be able to figure out if there's more shell casings from his handgun that possibly could be in the
The gentleman that was shot, patient, have you had any run-ins with him as a police department previously, or
not what our investigators are doing right now. That's all part of that investigation that will take place. They'll be looking into that and trying to figure out who this individual was, what might have made him act the way he did. But all that is still part of the early investigation. Those things will be resolved.
so the nurse thought he was being threatening with the gun?
Correct. Whether it was threatening or just his behavior was just alarming. Whether he was talking irrational, moving around, whatever the case may be, something.
Either way, he had a gun.
It alarmed her. It wasn't a situation where she walked in and someone was like, "Oh, I accidentally got my gun in here." That wouldn't have been alarming, right? She'd been like, "Okay, well, we need to get that out." It was his behavior with the possession of that firearm that caused her concern, and that's why she called it. Any other questions? Okay, thank you. If you have any other questions and you need to follow up, you can email at policepio@cityofirving.org, and we can be doing a follow-up tomorrow. Thank you.
Man, that can't be. Oh my goodness, man. It's just, I don't even. There you go.
Hey, man, thanks for coming out, Smash.
All right,
Nice
Bob.
Smash, hang on the same.
Okay.
This is Officer Brandon Porter. He's one of my backup.
Okay, what's up, boss?
You might be seeing him at some instances as well. So this is Smash the Top.
Okay.
He's a pretty good, big social media influencer. He's got a bunch of followers and everything like that. And
Okay, Bob.
we see him out at a bunch of things. He's a great guy.
Okay.
Hopefully,
Appreciate you. All right, appreciate you.
Steve Dollar guy, you gotta watch out.
Yeah, man. Ugh. Man, I'm gonna get ready to go. Well, thanks to everybody for tuning in. I'm out. Let me check on this other shoot.
Take this down.